Hey everybody, I'm Raven Maureen, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how to make view A of my first Know Me pattern. This is ME2104, and this is the tuxedo blouse. So go ahead and grab your pattern, your fabric, and your sewing tools, and let's get started. Here are the pattern pieces that you're going to need for view A. Pattern piece number 9, the continuous lap, you're going to cut 2. Pattern piece number 7, your collar band, you're going to cut 2 of your fabric and 2 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 1, you're going to cut 2 of fabric. Pattern piece number 6, you're going to cut 2 of fabric, 1 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 4, this is your button placket. You're going to cut 2 of fabric, 2 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 10, this is your cuff, cut 2 of fabric, 2 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 2 is your guide. You're going to cut it out, but you are not going to cut any fabric for this or interfacing. Pattern piece number 3, this is your front. You're going to cut 2. Pattern piece number 5, cut 1 on the fold, and this is the back. And pattern piece number 8, this is your sleeve. You're going to cut 2. Okay, so as you can see, I've already completed one side of the blouse, and that is because I want you all to trust the process. The block that you see here is going to turn into this pleated pattern piece here. So you are going to need some sort of marking tool. You can use a pen, or if you have lighter colors, you can use a marker. However, if you are pressing your pin tucks and you're using something that is that is removable by heat, this is probably not the most ideal tool. So you can also use chalk as well. So you have your block, and your block has notches here. So you have the double notches here. You also have double notches on your button placket. So you want to make sure your double notches are actually facing the side that your button placket is going to go on. That's how you know that you are in the right place. So I'm going to move my shirt out of the way. And now I'm just going to work on my block. So the easiest way for me to do this is to follow the fold lines for the tuck. So I like to press the pattern paper on the fold line of the tuck, and you can use some pattern weights to make sure that this stays in place while you do this. And you are simply going to draw a line. All right. Then you are going to take, making sure that you're lining up your pattern the right way. I'm going to fold it down again on the next fold line on the pattern paper. And I think this time I'm going to use a ruler to help me out too. Yes, perfect. Okay. 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 All right. Now, whether you choose to press this or finger press this is going to be dependent on your fabric and your preference, but fold it along the chalk line edge, grab some pins, go ahead and start pinning that, and we're going to stitch this down at a 3/8 seam allowance. You'll complete this step for the next set of pin tucks. You'll press or finger press depending on your fabric, and you will stitch in place at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And just a pro tip, be careful not to catch any additional fabric in that seam allowance. You don't want anything to get caught, and you'll continue to do this for both sides. All right, so remember we have the notch here. So we're actually going to press the pin tucks away from this double notch here. So go ahead and take your iron and press all of these down. And if you used a soluble marker or some chalk, you're going to have to probably take extra steps to wipe this away, probably using a damp cloth or just some sort of wipe. And then I also like to do it on the reverse side too, making sure that my pleats are, or my tucks are completely pressed and flat. And then you want to baste the top and the lower edge at your machine. Okay, so this is where making sure you don't cut the same piece twice gets really important. So if you notice, this is the guide. This is pattern piece number 2. You actually don't cut any sort of fabric from this pattern piece. This is literally the guide to help you cut this piece. So this is literally the mirror, the same exact cut here. The mirror piece, meaning the other side, I have to flip my guide over. And I'm still going to match my notches for that placket piece here. So now you see, once I cut it, I will have my left side and my right side perfect. Okay. So now I'm going to pin this down, making sure that this is as flat as possible and as smooth and accurate as possible. Okay, so now we have to like cut this out. So I recommend using a rotary cutter. That way you can really get into those curves nicely. All right, And then just clip into your notches that you see indicated on the pattern piece, on the guide. We've already done the notches for that one, but do that one as well, okay? The last step I'm gonna have you guys do for this part before we attach it to the rest of our shirt is we are going to baste the neckline here at 3/8 and then the lower edge at 3/8. All right, now here comes the really exciting part. Like, y'all, I love this part because now I get so excited and I'm like, it's taking shape. Okay. So grab pattern piece number 3, which is the front, and we are going to attach this curved piece into the front piece. Start pinning, and it'll feel like you're doing it wrong, but you're not, I promise. So as you can see, we did a few notches right in here. That's probably where you're going to need it the most. And so you're going to do a 5/8 seam allowance following this curve all the way down to the edge here. As you go around the curve, be sure to adjust the pins and the fabric as needed. That way you don't have any creases or wrinkles when you're done with the stitch. All right, so now we have 2 completed shirt fronts, and you should really be so proud of yourself because that is literally the hardest part of this entire blouse. Go ahead and finish the raw edges and press the seam towards the sleeve cap. Go ahead and stay stitch the neck edge of pattern piece number 5, and then we are going to put our pattern pieces right sides together. And this is where I'm going to divert from the instructions a little bit. We are only going to stitch at the shoulders, and then we are going to put our sleeves in through the flat sleeve method, which is, to me, it's a lot easier than easing in the sleeve. And so once again, we are only stitching the shoulders. Go ahead and stitch your shoulders at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, go ahead and grab your sleeve patterns and your pattern piece number 8. This is the sleeve, and you have a, I'll move this up. You have a spot here for your continuous lap because you have a cuff part with 3 buttons on your arm sleeve. So I have already gone ahead and I have marked the 3 dots on my fabric. What we are going to do now is we are going to snip this slash here. So now it's on both sleeves. Then, just like how we draw dart legs, I'm just going to draw some quick dart legs so that we know that this is our stitching line for this pattern piece. Okay, and now we are going to take this to our sewing machine, and we are literally going to stitch on those legs that we just drew with our marking pen. All right, so we stitched that. We're not gonna cut into this yet, but I just wanted to mark that so that way we have that out of the way, because now we are going to attach our sleeves. And now we are going to do the flat sleeve method for putting in the sleeves of our shirt. So if you've never done this method before, I will tell you that to me, I consider it easier because you're not doing any rows of basting or anything like that. You are simply just following the curvature of the sleeve cap. So the single notch and the single notch on the front, and then I have the double notch and then the double notch on the back. So kind of like how we pinned our bib in earlier is how we're gonna kind of do the same thing here. So when you are completing the flat sleeve method, you may find that you have additional fabric to ease in on the arm side or on the sleeve pattern. So what I always do is I clip in some notches, but I do it on the bodice piece. So if you find yourself with additional fabric, go ahead and clip in those notches like you see me doing here on the actual bodice piece, and it'll help to ease in that fabric. Go ahead and take this to your machine and sew this at 5/8, and we're going to do this the same way for both sleeves. Take your time with this step. You're going to have to remove the pins as you're sewing. I recommend doing this at your lowest speed setting if you can, as you're removing the pins and working around the curves and readjusting the fabric. Once you're done, go ahead and finish the edges of the sleeve cap. Now we're going to work on stitching the sides down and your sleeves. So fold your fabric or fold your blouse right sides together at the shoulder seam, and then what you're going to notice is that your sleeve seam and your side seam are all one really long seam. So go ahead and grab your pins and pin it from the beginning of the sleeve all the way down to the bottom of your blouse. And you're going to sew this at 5/8, and then you'll finish the seam. All right, so go ahead and finish that seam and press it towards the back shirt piece. And then I've already done it, but what I want you guys to go ahead and do is serge the bottom hem. And then from here, you're going to do a narrow hem followed by another narrowed hem, just like this, and you're going to stitch it all the way across the bottom edge. So go ahead and do that, and then we're going to work on our placket. Okay, so grab pattern piece number 4, which is your placket, and on the unnotched side, do a stitch at 5/8. I did mine in white thread so you guys can see it, but obviously you want to match that with your placket color. So I've already pressed it under at 5/8, and then we are going to trim this down. Okay, all right. So then we're gonna grab our shirt. So go ahead and match up your notch, your double notches on the placket and then the bib. And this is going to this is going to come past your bottom hem, which is why we did the bottom hem first, because you're going to enclose it. And it's going to have that really nice, beautiful finish. Okay, so go ahead and pin it. Again, make sure that that notch matches up with the bib notch. Okay, and you're going to sew this at your machine at 5/8. And then all the way at the bottom here, just like how you would do on a waistband, go ahead and pin this just like this. And we're gonna do a stitch right here. And this is gonna close up the placket really nicely. Just like that. Put the seam allowance. Turn it right side out and poke out that corner, and then take this to your iron. Be sure to press the placket really good along that seam line, and then we're going to take this back to our sewing table. Alright, so now that it's nice and beautifully pressed, we are going to put a couple pins in this, and you are going to slip stitch this closed, or you can stitch in the ditch. Alright, so now we're going to work on our collar stand, which is pattern piece number 7. What we're going to do is we're going to follow the dot markings. So the dot here, match that up to the folded edge of your placket. This dot here should match up to your shoulder seam. This dot right here will match up to your shoulder seam as well. And then again, the edge of the button placket should match up with this last dot right here on the band. And I would go ahead and put additional pins in since this is a curve. All right, so we're going to take this to our sewing machine, and we are going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Beginning at the center back, I'm going to stitch this at 5/8, back stitching forwards and backwards, and then continuing along the neckline. All right, now we're gonna work on our collar. So you should have two. One should be interfaced, another one should be just your fabric. And so go ahead and we're gonna pin these together, and you're gonna stitch along the short ends and then along the curvature here. Alright, so go ahead and trim down the seam allowance here, clipping into the corners to make those corners nice and sharp. And then you are going to press this at the iron once you turn it right side out. That way we can understitch the collar facing. Baste the raw edges of the collar together at your machine. Alright, so now we're going to attach our collar. So you have double notches here, and then you've got double notches on the band. So just match it up with the notches. And then you have a dot right here on your band. You're going to match it up right there so the edge of the collar matches up to the dot. You're going to do the same on the other side. Okay, and you're going to sew this up at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Beginning at the center of the collar, I'm going to stitch it down from one side and then turn the collar around and stitch it down from the middle again, going down the other side. All right, so go ahead and take the other collar band that you have, and you are going to place it down just like this, and it's literally going to match up to the one that's sewn down already. And you are going to pin this all the way around. You're going to stitch all the way at the sides here, going around that curve, and along the top here as well. So 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, going all the way around. All right, so I went ahead and I trimmed down the seam allowance, and then go ahead and just turn out this collar band. Okay, so once you've tucked in the seam allowance and pressed everything, go ahead and top stitch this at your machine. Okay, so now we're going to work on our cuff. You remember earlier we did the stitch line and we did like a little notch we are going to cut this all the way through, avoiding those stitching lines. Just like that. You're gonna grab pattern piece number 9, which is your continuous lap, which should have been cut on the bias, so it's gonna have a little bit of stretch to it. And you are going to pin this to this edge. And you're going to do this right sides together. So do this on the outside of your sleeve, on the right side of your sleeve. All right, so go ahead and stitch this at 1/4 inch at your sewing machine. All right, so once you stitch it down, go ahead and press the seam towards the center, and then you are going to press it again, and it makes basically like a bias tape for your shirt. And then this is how it'll look on the outside. So grab some pins. We're going to do a top stitch right along that edge here. All right, so go ahead and take pattern piece number 10, which is your cuff. And I've already stitched it at 5/8 on the unnotched side, and I've also pressed it under. So this is the notch side, unnotched side is pressed under at 5/8. We're gonna trim that down just like that. Okay, then you're gonna take your cuff, not your cuff, I'm sorry, your sleeve, and you should have done 2 rows of basting stitches after we did our continuous lap. So go ahead and gather those rows. You also have a little notch here that you can match up with this notch on the cuff. And then you have a dot here and a dot here that you'll match up the edges of your sleeve with. Okay, so go ahead and stitch this down at 5/8 at your machine. Okay, so now that we've stitched it, go ahead and take your cuff edge and line it up just like this. So you're gonna do a stitch right here and a stitch right here. All right, so go ahead, trim your seam allowance. Okay, so once you trim down the seam allowance, go ahead and turn your cuff right side out. Make sure you've poked out those corners. Now you're going to take your cuff and we're going to do some top stitching across this bottom edge here. And go to your machine and do a top stitch along that edge there. So now using the placket pattern piece, go ahead and mark your buttons, and using your machine settings, go ahead and add your buttons into your shirt and you're all set. Thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. I'll see y'all next time. Bye.